Davy. Hi, Davy, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly, and I can also see your slides as well. So, David, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to have you here as a keynote speaker, and you can start your presentation now. Good luck, stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to give a talk today. TCRS is a UK-based full-service CRO, and we focus on small, medium-sized enterprise. And my name is Davy, and I'm one of the co-founder of TCRS. So that's my sales pitch done. Recovering from COVID. It's a title that when we asked for the slides, our CEO, another co-founder, Peter, just got COVID before his holiday. And I thought it was actually quite fitting to have a title, Recovering from COVID. So what are we talking about today? What are the symptoms of COVID? Obviously from a CRO and sponsor point of view. What have we learned about it? How do we adapt? How do we change our approach in planning and delivering the studies? And more importantly, look at what has changed pre and post COVID. So symptoms of COVID, you can see on the screen. I wish I can actually give a talk on this. It'll be quite interesting. But unfortunately, today is not the day. But if you are suffering from any of these symptoms, please do a lateral flow test, and I wish you get better soon. TCRS have done our share of COVID studies over the last couple of years, and both phase 2 and phase 3, large and small studies in the UK, in Europe, and globally. So we actually have learned quite a bit from actually working with COVID and changed our ways. So what are some of the symptoms we've seen in COVID-19? I'm sure many of you have obviously had similar experience. Significant number of trials were on pause, with reviewers on pause, or you can actually do any of your studies during COVID time because the hospitals are only interested in doing COVID studies. Limited patients access to the hospital. So the hospital don't want your patients to come in. The patient don't want to come into the hospital because of COVID. Hospital reduced their capacity of research. So what I meant is lots of doctors in hospitals have set research time, a couple of hours a day. Lots of those research time been taken away to actually fill in for clinical demands. So they actually pull back into clinical services. Many research nurses were actually taken out from research and popped into clinical service to actually deal with demands during COVID. Change in regulatory and ethical approval processes. So there were some change during COVID because we were able to get a study started we submit a study for approval from day 1, and we're able to actually recruit our first patient on day 15. So that's COVID. And finally, it changed our approach in delivering clinical trials. So we looked at the symptoms, but what have we learned? It really made us address our own system and focus what is essential. What I mean, I've spoken to our project managers. We can have multiple trackers on the same thing, just explained slightly differently. I have actually, and then we have meetings. So it's actually focused us on what is essential. And that word essential actually led me to another thought. We work with one small biotech company, and the CEO of the company wants to test every single biomarker under the sun. And we said, well, actually, just try to focus on what is essential to get your drug to the next phase. So it's safe because it reduces the number of patients visits, reduced number of blood cells taken. Never before have been so critical to cut out unnecessary duplication and time wasting. And it's time wasting that I really want to talk about. Many of you probably have experience in actually negotiating budgets with a site. It could take anywhere from a month to 3 months and sometimes longer. During COVID time, we actually be able to do that within a week. It took a few days to actually get the sponsor, the CRO, the clinician, the pharmacist, the radiologist, all sitting together in one meeting, Teams meeting or Zoom meeting. We had a budget on the screen and we were able to agree a budget within 3 hours. And the whole process took 7 days. Why can we do that? Why is there so many time wasting going back and forth? Focus on the details of how the study will be run logistically at site. So during COVID, a patient comes in entrance A, and then they will sit in waiting room, a specific waiting room. They go to a clinical room to get treated, and then they exit in a particular exit. So how does that work when we actually, how does it change our way of thinking? So actually, instead of just thinking about how the patient goes through, it makes us think how to fit your clinical study towards the patient journey. And we'll come back to that word patient journey again and again. They also make you look closely at risk-based monitoring. Risk-based monitoring is something that I've been pulling my hair out over. We try to, because you can't actually go on site to monitor during COVID. Well, many sites won't let you on, so there's lots of risk-based monitoring. And you need to agree with your CRO, what percentage SDV do you want it done? How do you want the risk-based monitoring to be performed? Everyone have a slightly different idea what risk-based monitoring is. And we are always looking for better ways to do monitoring. And one of the things that came out is, can more be done by in-house data team to clean the data? And you actually have the chance to speak to the site, manage the sites, try to understand what problems they're facing instead of just telling them what data queries you have. Study planning is really important. Consider involving your CRO really early in the study design. Your CRO will never know as much about the product or the drug that you have. It will never know as much about the disease area as most doctors will. But their experience of actually making a protocol manageable for patients and sites, this is really important. Your CRO should understand how the site works. No, they should know who are the key players and how they interact. And let me give you an example. Well, I was running a study once, and in the site, it was a colorectal study, and the site was not recruiting at all. So the CRA actually went in there, walked through the patient journey. So they walked in through the front room and see what happens, and then they went and saw the consultant, see what happens, and came out. And she went back the next day and actually spoke to the receptionist. The receptionists actually know everybody, all the people in the waiting room, because these patients come in again and again. And she said, is it possible for the receptionist to hand out the patient information sheets? And so she did. The patient sat in the patient room, just having a glance at the patient information sheets, went into the clinic, actually spoke to the doctor about the trial, and that site became the most active recruiting site in the whole study. And the problem was the doctors and the nurses during the clinic were too busy doing what they're supposed to do. And 8 times out of 10, they forgot to ask the patient about the clinical trials. So in this particular site, the receptionist was the key person. And CRA, as I say, there should be a site project manager more than a monitor. They're not just there to make sure that your study is actually inputted correctly. They're there to manage the sites, see where the pain points are, how they can help the site to recruit patients. Given today inclusion and exclusion criteria, it's hard enough to find the right patient. And even if the patient passed the inclusion and exclusion criteria, they still need to agree to take on the trial. So every patient, every data point is absolutely critical. And relationship with sites is the key success factor. As we just mentioned, not just the professor, but the nurses or the people actually do the work. So the next step of planning and how we improve the way in thinking is making your study more practical. This is not a new thing, but it actually really brought to light during COVID. And this is something that we're actively doing post-COVID as well. Can you reduce the number of time patients visit the hospital? This has been talked about again and again and again for many, many years. But now post-pandemic, it's become more essential because patients just don't want to go to hospital. They think they're gonna get COVID or any other disease at hospitals. So if they have, after you reduce the number of hospitals and they make the visit as easy as possible for the patients, even taxiing the patient to and from appointments, so it's safe the patient actually going on public transport and potentially contracting COVID or any other diseases. Decentralization. Decentralization is a new buzzword in clinical trials at the moment. Everyone's talking about decentralization, but we don't have enough time to talk about that today. But I've got one thing to say in mind. When you're designing a trial to put decentralization in, make your decentralization process country specific. In America, it's very easy to actually hire a nurse to go to a patient's home to do some of the visits. In the UK, it's less easy. In some European country, it's also less easy. So think carefully and define your decentralization. Do patients need to be accompanied by a family member or helper? Maybe lots of your studies are quite sick patients. They do need a family member or a carer. If that's the case, make it easy for both the carer and the patient. Too often I've walked in the clinical room in my previous life and see a doctor talking to the patient alone and kind of ignoring the carer. The carer just sits in the corner playing on their phone. But when you're doing SIV, when you're doing the site training, actually get the doctor to engage with the carer as well, because making sure that both of them understand the study and you get significant better compliance with them in terms of drug compliance, in terms of actually attending the study visit on time, is really important. Yes, it's more work, but it's improved patient retention significantly. Are you expecting patients to wait while the drug is being set up? So let's think you're doing a dose escalation study. 1 hour infusion study, you need to take 3 hours and 6 hours PK blood post-dose. So a patient comes in at 9 o'clock in the morning, they do their safety bloods, and then by 10 o'clock, you receive the report saying everything is good to go, and pharmacy make up the infusion bag. It takes 2 hours. The patient received their dose at 12 o'clock, 3 hour post-dose at 3 o'clock, 6 hours post-dose, 6 o'clock. It's a very long day for the patient. What about taking the blood safety the day before, either at the patient's home or at the hospital? This allows you to prepare the drug the day before. So the patient now comes in at 9 o'clock, receive the dose. At 12 o'clock, they get the PK bloods done. At 3 o'clock, they get the last PK done. And then they'll be home by 4 o'clock. Much better day for the patient. Patient diaries. I hate patient diaries. I've been doing clinical trials for 15 years, and I can tell you that I have never, ever seen a patient diary completed fully without any intervention from the doctor or nurses. They forgot it, the dog chewed it, you name it, it happened. Are they really needed? Would they actually give you the data that you really needed for getting the drug approved? Some answers yes, but maybe we could using technology, find better ways of doing it. Electronic patient diaries, for example. But often I get back and say, oh, my population of patients are quite elderly and they won't want to use an electronic diary. I say, give it a try and teach them. You'll be surprised. How about remote consent? Patients don't have to come into the hospital anymore. They can do the consent over the phone or video call. Patient can read all about the study and sign in their own time. Obviously, but they might find it less intimidating because they don't want to travel in the hospital. I've started some one-to-one sessions to actually go through the material and can send them before the screening commence. According to my GTP person, this is acceptable. Liaise with your patient support network of your therapy area and Cancer Research UK, Macmillan Supports, and the list goes on. They're a really useful source of information because they understand the current treatment regimes, which is useful. But what is the most important thing is they have an invaluable insight into the problems and worry faced by your patients. And if you understand those two things, you're halfway to a better protocol. And then if you show the patients that your company sponsor actually care about their problems and worries, you'll improve your patient retention and recruitment. Get your CRO to liaise with some of the potential sites before the finalizing the protocol. This is my favorite one because they will give you invaluable feedback on how the study will work at their hospital. And this might bring like small tweaks to the protocol that you wouldn't have thought of. And these small tweaks could make all the difference in our patient retention. Again, talk to the study nurses at sites and not just the KOL, because they might have to take a different take on what is feasible and what is feasible, and because they are the ones doing this. As the introduction said, I've spent about almost a decade in hospital doing research management, running hospital research departments. And CROs are very poor at managing hospitals. And this is why I started TCRS in the first place. Because lots of CROs and sponsors have a very sketchy understanding of the process, priorities, and people. What do I mean? Processes is how your study moves through from first engagement to actually starting up all the different committees. The priorities, what are the priorities of the study of the hospital? The priorities would be maybe currently reducing backlog so they don't have time for research, or maybe they just have a new oncology research unit. They want to get more oncology studies in. And the people, maybe they are actually don't have enough staff to do it. We'll come back to the 3 Ps, the process, priorities, and people later. But without understanding these 3 Ps, it results in selecting the wrong sites, slow study startup, slow recruitment, and ultimately demotivating hospital sites. So if you manage your hospital sites correctly, you reduce the famous 50% of sites failing to enrollment targets significantly. And TCRS have worked with more than 50%, actually more than 75% of UK hospitals. And the same theory goes, the same theory works. Give them time to understand the sites, talk to them, understand them. And same again across the European countries, Netherlands, Greece, Switzerland, Belgium. Each country is slightly different. Currently, I'm pulling my hair over Italy and Spain because I just received an email this morning and said, Davy, in Italy, we don't work in July and August, come back in September. So what has changed and what hasn't changed in COVID? So during COVID times, we can get a research ethics committee and a competent authority approval within 14 days for COVID studies. Literally from day of submission to actually with day of submission to the end approval, 14 days. Site contract negotiation, as I mentioned, you could done within 7 days. Site approvals within 14 days. Site initiation are done virtually, which is amazing because it makes it so much easier for the sponsor to attend because the sponsor knows so much more about the product and they can actually give a fairer and it just makes the whole thing more informative for the site. Site files were done electronically. Last time I gave a similar talk, a QA person come back and say, how do you do a QA? That is a question. And I think things are moving towards the right direction about electronic site files. Monitoring visits, don't swear, there were just no monitoring visits. They weren't allowed on site. And we have CRAs holding up, site nurses holding up documents through the webcam to say that, yes, this person did sign the consent form. It wasn't perfect. Back to present days, if you can get a site to actually take up your study, your research ethics committee and the competent authority approvals, gone back to 40 to 60 days, more than 60 days. The urgency have disappeared. The site contract negotiation, 12 weeks and longer sometimes. Site approval, again, 14 to 16 weeks. Site initiation is still done virtually. And site files, we have gone back to killing trees and printing them and sending them to sites. Monitoring visits, again, don't swear, it's not perfect, but it's getting better. So things have gone backwards post-pandemic, but there are some things that got better. You would think that if they can improve studies within 14 days before, things will have got better in the Research Ethics Committee and competent authorities. Not really. But there are some things that got better, like adding new sites, changing PI. How we do PS, pre-site visits and site initiation visits are much better, as I said, because you can get the sponsor more easily, you can get the pharmacist more easily, you can get the doctor more easily. But what's really important is actually how we approach fitting the study to the patient pathway, like logistics. For the last 4 or 5 years, I've attended a lot of conferences, and you'll hear from sponsors talking about the drug trials, you'll hear from a patient group talking about the experience, you'll hear from regulatory experts talking about another change to the regulatory system, or you can talk about, you have vendors talking about how wonderful they are. And by the way, TCRS is wonderful. But very few talks is talking about the hospitals, which is strange because hospitals is the face of your clinical trial. They are one of the key component of your clinical trials and determines your success. Picking the right hospital is important, but actually building that relationship with the hospital is also important. Hospitals are not vendors. Their key job is to deliver treatment to patients, sick patients. As much as I hate to admit it, and I have worked with, as I said, I've worked in hospital for many years. Research, although it's not an optional extra, usually at a lot of hospital is still seen as something that they can or they don't have to, but if they like, they can do. So therefore, is really understand that dynamic and relationship. You need to understand the priorities. As I said, many of the hospital priorities currently across UK and Europe, it's about reducing the backlog that have built up over COVID time. So if they haven't reduced the backlog, maybe those hospitals are not the best hospital actually to approach, or go back to them a couple of months later. People, as I said, lots of actually research staff, research clinical staff been actually taken away from research. You need to see if the hospital actually have the people to do the work. Again, processes, you think that the processes will have got slicker because they were able to do it in such a short period during COVID. But no, because now they have more committees, more times to actually look at the hospital priorities and the hospital people. But understanding that process help the CRO, help the sponsor to manage expectations. For sponsors, manage expectations of your investors. For CROs, manage expectations of your sponsor. So I think I'm coming up to my last 10 minutes, so I can just finish up here. So in summary, have we recovered from COVID? I don't think so. And we will never recover from COVID. COVID has changed the landscape, changed the way we think and deliver clinical trials. It will settle down over the next 12 months, hopefully, but things have changed forever, some for good and some not so good. But what has changed is our approach, ours in the sponsor and the CROs, in planning and delivering clinical trials. Better study designs, you can see all sorts of different great ideas coming up now with your, and things like decentralizations, etc. Making use of technology, more technologies out there. In the last couple of conferences I attended, the decentralizations, how video conferencing, e-consents, electronic patient diaries, there's so much technology out there. Make use of them. Don't be scared, try them. and better understanding of hospital priorities, people, and process. We just talked about that. Understand those, not just the CRO, but yourself as well. Just understand that a hospital is not a vendor. And with the right study design and the right understanding of your hospital, I still truly believe you can deliver your study to time and target. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention today. And that's the end of my presentation.
Hi, Davy. Thank you so much for your wonderful session. And can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes,
I
we can.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so we have received a question for you in the chat. So the question is, okay, let me read this for you. Why is it that we need to negotiate contracts separately in each hospital in the UK? Why can't the UK adopt the French system where you negotiate with one side and the contract is applicable to all hospitals?
Right. I was there when the idea is there, one contract. So in the UK, we have one contract and one costing, but each hospital wants something different. So I understand from the NIHR, and I know someone from the NIHR is talking today or today. The original idea was that there's one costing for all the hospitals and one contract for all the hospitals with their slightly different markup. But every hospital is different. And, one hospital, let's say in York, their cost and their infrastructure costs will be different from what is in UCL in London. I also think that is too much of a cartel problem. It's like this is UK. This is our price. In France, I don't think all hospitals use the same. There's one negotiate, and then you still need to negotiate further later down the line. I think the UK is trying to have one system, but I can't be here to defend the NIHR and the systems to decide on what's going on, how they do the negotiation. But they are thinking about that way. They're trying to move that way. It's getting the engagement of the NHS to actually accept one costing because they want to have a say in their income, basically, because every hospital is a standalone entity. So they want to have some kind of say in their income. And the last point is, if you have a standardized cost across all sites, you will find that your clinical trial will be significantly more expensive because every site will want to add the extra little bits in. Some sites in, say, Nottingham, they will want to add, some site will want to charge, if a patient's, let's say my PK example, if a patient was dosed at 12 o'clock and they have to do a 6-hour PK blood, some hospital will charge you 6 hours worth of nurses' time to rent the room. Some other hospital will just charge you time, the interaction between the patient and the nurses. So different hospital, different way of actually costing their study. And if you standardize it, it will make it so much more expensive for the sponsor. Because everyone will just go for the one that costs the most money.
Thank you so much. David, that was a great presentation. I just want to retrace some of the things you've said based on my own experience at King's College Hospital in London, where I was for about 10 years doing research into breast, lung, naming anything oncology. I just want to restate the importance of family members and also from practical experience. When you have a patient, especially with cancer, when you are telling them about the diagnosis or the treatment that is out there, at that time, all they can think of is cancer death. So they're not actually hearing what you're saying. So it's very important to always have somebody with that person, with the patient, who can, after the meeting with the doctors or the clinician, can actually take note and then tell them about the clinical trials. And that's what I used to do. So it's not just talking to the patient, but always tell the patient to bring someone who later on they can interact with. That really does help. The second thing I want to mention is about having the blood the day before if you're having PK or series of meeting instead of keeping the patient all day. Again, it's about the stress level of that patient. If you tell the patient, and it depends on where they live in relation to where the hospital is. If a patient is being referred to the central hospital, which is like miles away from home, they might want to come that same day, do everything the same day, and then go back home. But if they want to come the day before and then you do the others, so the onus is discussing with the patient on which one will be preferable. And sometimes, for example, at King's College in London, we had something called the halfway house, where patient can actually, it's like a hostel or like a Airbnb, not far from the walking distance from the hospital, where the patient can spend the night and then come back to the hospital the second day without actually traveling home to do the rest. So I just want to share that practical aspect because you mentioned it, and it's something that should work anywhere we are in the world. Thank you so much.
Just on that point about putting the patients in hospitals, if you're working with King's College, don't use the halfway house. Go and get a hotel by yourself because their up cost on it is significant. So I worked a lot with King's College.
So thank you so much, Devi, for your wonderful session. I hope everyone have enjoyed the session, and I'll ask the audience that if they are still having any question, they can ask you in the chat or in the Q&A session. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed the wonderful session, and thank you, Grace, for your participation as well. And now